Well, it's better late than never, but we're going to get into the Temur PRECON tonight and go ahead and give you my ideas of what I would do with this deck if I were to take it apart and rebuild it. So let's get started on that right now. Let's kick this off talking about the Spirit Dragon commander of the deck, Ureni of the Unwritten. For 4, a green, a blue, and a red, you get a 7/7 Spirit Dragon with flying and trample that when it enters or attacks, you get to look at the top 8 of your library and put a dragon from among those cards onto the battlefield, and then the rest on the bottom in a random order. It's a really powerful commander, and it's almost to the point where it's almost too powerful. It's one of the reasons why I don't particularly care for this commander. And it's also one of the reasons why this PRECON costs so much. So if I was going to build around this particular PRECON with Ureni at the front, I would add things like Wrathful Red Dragon, because we're going to be focusing on dragons and we want to protect them. So if they get damaged in combat or whatever, it's going to reflect damage back at your opponents. We're also going to want to cheapen things up, because one of the big problems with this deck is there is a very large curve on it with all these dragons. So you're going to have something like Goldspan Dragon to give you treasures to kind of ramp us out, or Urza's Incubator so that we can go ahead and cheapen up dragons by naming dragons, or Dragon Speaker Shaman, same thing, it cheapens dragons by 2, or the Carnelian Orb of Dragonkind, which gives us red mana and gives our dragons haste. There's just a lot of ways to go about keeping our dragons ramped up and amped up if you're going to run Ureni at the front. Now, unlike the Spirit Dragon commander, I really do like Eshki Temur's Roar from the deck. A green, a blue, and a red. It's a 2/2 human warrior that says whenever you cast a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Eshki, and if that power of the spell is 4 or greater, draw a card. If it's 6 or greater, Eshki then deals damage equal to her power to each opponent. So there's a lot of ways you could go about this. You don't have to necessarily use the dragons that come in the deck in order to build around Eshki. You can go dinosaurs, or you can just go beasts, or you can go all kinds of big, scary monsters, or you can just kind of mix and match. You don't even have to go with one particular creature type in the deck to make it strong. You can just kind of mishmash a bunch of good, powerful stuff, mixing the dragons, the dinosaurs, and all the other stuff together, and coming up with a much more interesting deck than I think that Ureni offers in the PRECON. That said, if you're going to build around Eshki, in this case, I'm going to recommend some dragons just to kind of keep with the PRECON, and so you don't have to go hunting up a bunch of big monsters on the side on top of this. So something like Balefire Dragon to go ahead and burn your opponent's stuff down, or Bonehorde Dracosaur, which makes more dinosaurs for us and is a pretty good threat in and of itself. Shivan Devastator is kind of a modified thing, because Eshki is going to look at it on the stack and go, okay, is it a 4? So you pay 5 mana for X is 4, you get the 4 power. And if you get to the 6 mana, that's 7 mana in total with the red and the X. And then you go ahead and you get to burn stuff by Eshki's power. So there's some flexibility with the Shivan Devastator as well. Terror of the Peaks, it adds to the burn damage that Eshki can do as the dragons come down. They start blasting our opponents. And then I also wanted to include a couple of good cards from the PRECON. I wouldn't necessarily put these with Ureni, but with Eshki, they work out pretty nicely, and that is Roar of Endless Song and Mammoth Bellow, because we're going to be creating 5/5 elephant tokens off of these things. And then the Roar of Endless Song actually doubles the power on Chapter 3 of all your creatures, so you get a temporary boost in power of everything, including these dragons, and this thing can kick your butt. I lost terribly to this thing at the pre-release, and it is actually a really strong card. Now, if you're sticking with the dragon theme, then there's actually some cards that I would include in either of the builds that I would want to have, such as Lozon Dragon's Legacy. This is kind of a cheap version of the Terror of the Peaks. It's a lot weaker, of course, and it's also restricted to adventure or dragon spells, whereas the terror works with anything coming into play. But it gives us a nice way to create more blasting damage. Or Scourge of Valkus counts all the dragons, and you start blasting away with that. Or Thrakus the Butcher, which actually pumps our dragons on the attack. Twin Flame Tyrant, which doubles the damage of all of our creatures, and it's just on a theme as a dragon. Sarkhan's Unsealing gives us more burn damage with all of our stuff, and the bigger the creature you cast, the more damage it's going to do. And eventually, if you pass that cap, you're going to do damage to everything. And then I'm also included just a more thematic mana creature here in Rattleclaw Mystic, which it taps for any of the 3 colors in the deck. It helps us ramp into these big monsters a little bit better, and I'm kind of surprised it did not come in the Precon. Now, I also wanted to mention some of the new cards from the new set that I'd also include in this PRECON in both, such as Herd Heirloom. This thing is great for ramping up and giving our stuff trample, or Encroaching, Breaching, and Roiling Dragonstorms. All of these work really well if you're running a dragon theme because you get their effects of, giving yourself some cards to go ahead and draw, or you're going to go ahead and you'll get free spells off of them, or you're going to go ramp in some lands, and then as you cast your dragons, you get to get the spell, the enchantment back to your hand and do it all over again later in the game. Dragonologist is a great way to give our stuff flash if you're running dragons. And then we can also get into some of the new cards like Winter Night Stories, which works with Harmonize, which cheapens our stuff because you're going to slam a dragon and able to use that to tap and harmonize it out of the yard as a flashback effect. Bloomvine Regent helps us ramp into stuff and then later becomes a dragon on our board. Temur Battle Crier cheapens up our stuff because all the stuff is going to be power 4 or greater for the most part. So for every one of those creatures on the board, the next thing just gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and just kind of chains down the line. Sarkhan Dragon Ascendant loves us casting dragons to make him bigger and turn him into a dragon, so he's a perfect fit in the deck. And then last but not least, Dragon Back Assault. It's a little mini Wrath, 3 damage effect to all of the creatures, but then we get to have, every time we play a land, we get another 4/4 dragon on the board, which just goes hand in hand with the themes of the deck. Now, one final thing about this Precon is something that I will not be adding to the deck, and it should be pretty obvious now without being mentioned earlier, and that is Miram Sentinel Worm. This particular dragon would be a very powerful inclusion in any variation of this deck. However, it is also one of the most oppressive, most unfun, and patently broken legends ever printed into dragons. In my experience, playing this is akin to dropping a nuke into a game, and if it's not countered or killed right away, the player that uses it is just going to overwhelm the board with just 1 or 2 dragons being cast into it. It's just that good of a card to the point that it just overshadows just about any other dragon you could put into the deck. I want the deck, however I build it, to either be about Ureni or Eshki, not Miram. But by default, it's probably going to be the best dragon you could slot into the deck because of its colors. It's also a really good way to alienate a group and not make them want to play with you anymore. It's your choice on whether to include a card like this in your deck, but this card will make your deck automatically a power level 4, straight up. End of discussion, especially if you're running any kind of tutors or other ways to dig it out quickly, because it just becomes the default thing you're going to want to dig out of the deck. The only way I'd ever consider running this card in the deck is no tutors in the deck and very minimal card draw to make the chances of it getting out in any single game just a lot lower, but then that actually affects the consistency of the rest of the deck, so I'd rather just leave it out. If you want some kind of dragon cloning tech for your deck, then may I suggest something like Clone Legion or Doppelgang as just some one-shot, harder to abuse variations to get duplicates of dragons on the board into the battlefield. So those are my ideas for the Temur Roar deck. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. I apologize for the lateness. I wanted this out last week, but I just couldn't get it in time because of my schedule. That said, love you guys. Catch you later, and I will see you in the next video.